You're listening to HR Leader, inspiring you to lead the workforce of tomorrow.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the HR Leader podcast. My name's Jerome Doraisamy and I'm coming to you today from Camaragal Land in Sydney. I'm very pleased to be joined for this conversation by Pauly Grant, who is the Chief Talent Officer in APAC and in ANZ for Publicis Groupe. Pauly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Today we are going to be discussing ending the stigma of cancer in the workplace. Now, when it comes to illnesses at work, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years about mental health issues, about disabilities, and of course it's absolutely right that we have open and honest conversations about those things. But I'm really keen to learn a bit more from Pauly about how and why it's so important that we also talk more about cancer and how that impacts upon workers across the board and what more workplaces can be doing to better support their employees. Pauly, before we get into all of that, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Okay. Well, I probably don't have the most conventional journey into a Chief Talent Officer. And just to demystify the title, it's pretty much a Chief People Officer, but I work for a French company, so the terminology is a little bit different. I actually entered my career studying nursing at university. So I always had that caring aspect to what I wanted to do. And then I went into a variety of careers, always around people management, in fashion to communications. And then I really stumbled across a head of people role. It wasn't until I was 32. And it was in an independent agency called Naked. And that's where I learnt so much around culture, and that everything you do in an organisation communicates to its people, and how you act and respond is so important. And if you can get that right and you can start to create that really special culture, you will bring the best out in people. And since then, I've moved into the Publicis Groupe way back in 2012. Never thought I'd still be here, but I've had great opportunities, and it's an organisation that really focuses on its people, and I feel that I have the empowerment to be able to look at how we do things and progress the business forward as a result.
And do you have a particular vision for what constitutes best practice when you're implementing the right kind of culture, or is it something that for you has evolved over time?
Look, it's actually interesting. I would say over the last couple of years it has. I've always had this kind of North Star that if you can connect to what motivates and makes people happy, then you will have success and you will have business success. I think they're just intrinsically linked. So that's probably the foundation of it. I would also go as far as saying it's not just about the actual job that they're in. It's not just about the company values. It goes as far as the work environment. I'm also quite into work environment and the space that people work in and how that can facilitate different feelings and responses and I suppose commitment and loyalty to a company. However, in the last couple of years, I think as people professionals, we used to focus a lot on that employee experience, what was called the employee experience. So how do you make work life better? Yeah. And I've really started to look at a different philosophy around life experience. And that's really how work fits into your overall life. Yeah. And I think especially after the event of COVID, people started to give themselves permission to look deeper into what they really wanted on a much wider scale than I think they'd probably been given permission to do beforehand. And I think as organisations, we've then needed to shift to go, we can't just look at someone as an employee. I don't use that terminology. I use the word people because that is a certain part of their lives. They are a person, and when they come to work, it's a smaller part. So I think as organisations, we need to be looking at someone's whole life, and then how as an organisation do we respond to that?
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, that idea of looking at someone in a more holistic fashion as opposed to simply being a number in the context of the 9 to 5. And that probably offers us a nice segue into talking about destigmatizing cancer, which I'm really keen to hear more from you on. And I've been looking forward to this conversation because, at face value, you'd think that, well, of course we should destigmatize something like cancer in the workplace. That makes total sense. But I'm curious to know about the extent to which this is still stigmatized at work because I think every one of us knows somebody who either has cancer or who has had cancer. Perhaps they've all had they've had cancer themselves, and so it's not like an illness like depression which is still relatively new in terms of our collective acceptance and understanding. So could you tell me why this is such an important conversation for us to be having?
Well, you mentioned it in your comment just then that I think it's 50% of the Australian population will either be diagnosed or know someone who's diagnosed. I mean, personally, I've had 2 really close friends in the last 2 years pass away from cancer. So, it is so prevalent and it touches all of us, really. When you look at the working age or the working population, 40% will be diagnosed. So it's a really it's something that I'm actually surprised that we haven't done more, if I'm honest, because to your point, we do double down on lots of things in the workplace, but it's something that I don't think has been perhaps addressed as much as it should be. The reason why, I'm not sure. I think it's interesting when we started to look into it, a lot of organisations do have something in their policy book, but they're not necessarily talking about it, or they're not necessarily wrapping it up in a conversation that is digestible for people in the organisation or people who are diagnosed with cancer in their organisation.
So what does this stigma look like? And notwithstanding, of course, that it may not be one size fits all, but are we talking about people feeling as though they can't speak up about the fact that they have got a recent diagnosis? Is it that there are issues around returning to work or how much time they need off? What is the stigma here?
We did some research across our organisations. We have 100,000 employees globally. And about 50% of people felt that they wouldn't be comfortable talking about it. So there's a start. Okay. So I think it really depends for a lot of people on the relationship with their manager or how they feel about it personally. So I feel like there's a definite basis of people just not feeling comfortable because it's not spoken about enough. If you think about the changes we've made around mental health, for example, if you think about the massive swing we've made around parental leave and returning to work and things like that, that's because we're having lots of conversation and we've been having lots of conversations for many years now. And that's a journey. I don't think organisations have started that really strong, open journey when it comes to cancer and starting to remove that stigma.
That's really interesting to me because I would have thought that conversations around cancer hadn't really gone away. I mean, if you think about charities in Australia, I may be getting this totally wrong, but something like the Cancer Council, it may not be a charity. I apologise if it isn't. But Cancer Council would be one of the most recognisable names in Australia for awareness raising or information sharing. So is it the case that because we started talking more about other things like mental health issues, that cancer is perhaps getting lost in the shuffle?
It's interesting. There is a lot of information, you are right, around cancer, and Cancer Council does a fantastic job. We actually partner with them on working with cancer in Australia. However, I think that's been around the awareness of the illness, the treatment of the illness, resources for people when they are diagnosed and how we go forward, preventative measures and awareness around that. Where I think we're doubling down and where we need to double down in Australia is around how does that then translate into someone in a workplace who is diagnosed or a manager in a workplace who has someone in their team who is diagnosed. How do we talk about that and make that an easier conversation, and how do we support those people better in an organisation?
So, Pauly, let's talk about the employee experience. So, if you God forbid, if you are diagnosed with cancer in its many forms, what is the general sort of attitude or response to that when it comes to making a disclosure in the workplace, which I suppose at some point you're going to have to do?
I think it depends on the organisation. We've got a really interesting journey to where we've come to with that. And I would like to think off the back of that it's much easier and more comfortable for people to do that in our organisation now. Previously, you would go to your manager, you'd talk to your manager about the situation, you'd have a conversation around what that might mean. Quite often you don't know what that means when you get your first diagnosis. So it's really working with them on a one-on-one basis. And previously in our organisation, we would absolutely support people, whether it was with time off, whether it was with flexibility, whatever we needed to do. But I would say it was very ad hoc. And so now we've kind of moved that approach to a much more upfront awareness around what is available to our people, what we believe is an organisation. And it's really changed people's lives who have been diagnosed in our organisation since.
Yeah, I want to sort of circle back to some of these practical measures that can and should be implemented, because as you're speaking, the wheels started turning in my head about some potential gaps that might exist in workplace policies and frameworks. But still on the stigma point, I'm curious if you think that self-stigma could be a factor here. If people feel like they can't say something about it, or they shouldn't because it might impact their upward trajectory for promotions or pay rises. Even though I would say cancer is something that pretty much all Australians would understand is a real thing, of course. There's of course stigma around. I keep mentioning depression and other mental health illnesses, but and those are things that some people may not fully understand or appreciate. But I think everyone understands that cancer is a serious thing. So is self stigma a factor here?
Absolutely, but I think that can be impacted by the way the organisation responds, right? So I think it's a little bit of a circle, really. If you know that your organisation is going to be there and support you no matter what, then I think it would be easier to talk about. If you don't know that, then it does become harder, because you do start to doubt, what does that mean for my job? Are they going to think that I'm not capable? And I'll take it back to what I was talking to before. If you go back to parental leave, it was a scary thing to say to your manager, 10 years ago, I'm pregnant, because you don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to have my job when I come back? Are they going to think that I'm not capable? Am I going to miss out on that promotion? So I think absolutely. And I also think I can't even imagine what it would be like to be diagnosed with cancer. I can't, because I've not been in that situation. But there are so many, you're thinking about your mortality. You're thinking about your immediate situation with your family, and then on top of that, you've got your work, your financial situation. So I can only imagine how mind-blowing that would be to even know how to have that conversation. There's so many fears, I would imagine, going on at that point.
How well do you think Australian workplaces are doing when it comes to addressing this stigma? There are a million and one things that Australian businesses have to worry about right now. The rise of AI and how to implement that into the workplace. Obviously, dealing with multi-generational workforces, navigating remote and flexible working arrangements. On top of all the economic and geopolitical things that businesses have to contend with. So there's a lot of urgent priorities right now, and perhaps something like this is getting lost in the shuffle. But from your perspective, are our businesses actually doing well when it comes to addressing this, or do we have a fair way to go?
I think we've got a fair way to go, if I'm honest. However, I think with anything, as long as we take that first step and we start that journey, then we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And there are some organisations that I've seen that are doing really well. They have a really active community. They talk about the support and the policies, and I think that's a really positive thing. So there's other organisations, like you mentioned before, which is Cancer Council, that have immense amount of resource. They have training for managers, courses that you can take so they know how to deal with people if they're diagnosed with cancer. And there's another organisation called Live with Cancer that's actually been created by past cancer survivors, and they're starting to form, they've got an organisation that's starting to work with workplaces in order to help them really facilitate a work environment that is more supportive with people who are diagnosed. So I think we've got a long way to go. I think some organisations are doing it well. There is a range, and I think we've got some organisations popping up that are really start to partner with people to help them get there.
Good. So let's talk about some of the practical ways that businesses and certainly the HR teams working with them can look to destigmatise these matters and empower individuals to feel free to talk about these things and obviously get the support they need. And before we get into some of those actions to be taken, I'm curious to know if you think there are certain questions that a business needs to ask of itself, and certainly do the HR professionals need to be asking certain black and white questions in order to get started?
Okay, so there's a few things in there. So maybe I'll break that down a little bit. I'll start with, what can the HR community do? First of all, it's not just HR. I really think and I really believe that it's got to be leadership and it's got to come from the whole organisation. And if I talk about our experience, this came from our global CEO. So our global CEO in end of 2022 put out a video to 100,000 people across the business, letting them know he'd been diagnosed with cancer. So instantly you've got someone openly talking about their diagnosis to say, I'm not going to be here for a couple of months. This is what's happened, but I will be back. See you then. He had an overwhelming amount of emails from people with various responses, many of them about, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that you said that. I've been diagnosed with cancer in the past and I didn't feel like I could be that open about it. Ranging from that to, I have someone in my team, I don't know what to do, and I'm really grateful that he'd done that. Off the back of that, he promised if he made it back, that he would put the might of Publicis, we're an advertising communications company, behind removing the stigma of working with cancer.
Great.
Hence where Working with Cancer was born from. And partnering with Macmillan organisation in the UK and different organisations around the world to help us do this, not experts. So leadership is key, and he's led that from the top. And so when you look at it from an organisational point of view, make sure that you are discussing this with your leadership. Bring it up as, there's lots of facts and data. We've spoken about it. It touches everyone. So bring that up as an important point. Look at what you already have.
Yeah.
And so what we've found is Publicis went out with a pledge to its employees. Now, we went very strong with our pledge to the point we keep someone's job and pay them financially for up to a year if they're diagnosed with cancer. Because one of the things we found is the first thing people worry about is their financial state.
Of course.
So if you take that away, what are they doing? They're focusing on their health and getting better.
Yeah.
So we've done that, and we've also got a community and coaches for anyone who is diagnosed within the organisation, and then we've worked with the Cancer Council to train and manage our managers. So I think as an organisation, look at what you have. You might actually be surprised at what's already available to you. How do you then bring that together and speak about it and talk about it? Some of the other organisations I've seen have got great communities together, either of survivors, of people who have been diagnosed. How do you come together as an organisation? I think a lot of organisations are good at fundraising.
Yeah.
But how do you turn that into action? So what we say is action, exposure and intent. So what are the actions that you can take as an organisation? How do you expose them to everyone? How do you talk about it? How do you talk about it freely so that conversation is there and people feel open and they're able to talk about it? And then what's your ongoing intent around how you embed that in your organisation?
Yeah. Well, those are some really good action steps. Thank you for detailing those. And it sounds as though with your own organisation that there's some really good frameworks and a good sort of top-down cultural attitude around this as well. Are there any approaches that you've seen or you perhaps experimented with, or maybe you've heard about them? Any approaches that won't work moving forward?
I think sometimes in our area we can introduce lots of initiatives. I really don't like the word initiative for this reason, because you kind of put it in and where does it go from there? It's kind of like this little dipstick kind of thing. And we'll get a lot of momentum and then it either peters off or stops. So I think it's really important to have that ongoing intent and the actions off the back of it and really make it quite real for people who are, like, it's meaningful. And it needs to become part of the culture of that organisation. So I think one watch out is don't make it an initiative. Spread what you're doing. For example, I'm a big believer in everything communicates. We changed our kind of personal leave to wellness leave some time ago, so people knew that wellness leave is there to for preventative health measures as well. So, we openly say use it for screening. Go and get your screenings. Take a wellness day. Just changing that vocabulary makes people, even when I'm like recruiting or someone's, talking about it when they're coming into the organisation, it's such a small thing. But they actually go, oh, okay, they really mean it. So I think making sure that when you're doing this, you're looking at your whole organisation and what are those areas of your organisation that you need to embed an element of this program or approach to actually change the way your organisation works. I think that's probably the biggest watch out.
Yeah. Pauly, I just have a few more questions for you, which we'll get to on the other side of this. And Pauly, should HR professionals, team leaders, or the business as a whole, should they also be looking at, their workplace policies, to ensure, first of all, there aren't any gaps in them, but also that, the language is up to speed, going to your previous point.
Yeah. Yes, it's the foundation of what we do. However, I always lead with the language and the conversation. I think sometimes as HR professionals, we can lead with a policy. I think it needs to be flipped, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think you need to look at the ecosystem that you have, the touch points that you need to engage in, and then your policy is the backbone of that. That's what creates that equity and consistency. So we have someone in one team, they're going to be treated and supported in the same way as someone in another, regardless of who their manager is. And that policy backbone helps support that. But you need to start with everything else.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, that idea that, we're not going out and directly saying, if you get a cancer diagnosis, feel free to speak up. It's about making little tweaks to the culture and the vibe of the workplace environment, so that if and when somebody does have an illness that they need to disclose, that they already recognise that it is a supportive, collegiate workplace that will support you no matter what's going on.
I think also you spoke before about, the appetite of businesses and so forth. It's really interesting off the back of working with cancer. There's now 4,000 organisations globally signed up. So these are from, very big, large global organisations to like local production houses. It shows you that there was a gap, right? That everyone now is kind of building around this, and that then touches over 35 million employees in different organisations. So I think really banding around, and when we go out to people who are interested in signing the pledge and getting on to working with cancer, what we say is it doesn't have to be big. it's just something. How are you bringing it together as an offering for your people? And absolutely policy is part of that, but there will be other things that surround that, and just really looking at what you have and then building from it.
Yeah. Pauly, how optimistic are you that Australian businesses and their leaders can make the right shifts here and move towards proper destigmatisation of cancer and of course of all illnesses?
It's an interesting one at this time, isn't it? Because at the moment we're seeing, unfortunately, some global organisations or organisations pull back on things like DE&I and so forth. Thankfully, Publicis is very strong. We have Viva La Difference as our philosophy and have for a very long time. But I think there's this unusual frame of thinking at the moment where we've kind of gone from that community thinking down to this individualism and what is in it for me. I have a lot of faith in Australia. I think we generally like to look out for people when they're in need, and I would hope that businesses have that same approach. I have hope and faith that good organisations recognise that supporting and looking after their people means that they will be happy and they'll produce their best work, right? So it's only a good thing for an organisation. Going back to our very early conversation, most of us have experienced people or who have been diagnosed with cancer or have experienced ourselves. So it's something that most people can relate to, that resonates, whether you're a leader, whether you're someone just starting in an organisation, it does resonate with most people. So I would hope that leaders of organisations around Australia would look at this, would lean in and start to explore what this could mean for them and their people.
Yeah. Well, Pauly, I've gotten a lot out of this conversation today. Thank you very much for coming in. Before I let you go, do you have any parting words of wisdom for business leaders and HR professionals about how best they can ensure that, in the sea of urgent priorities that they have day to day, that destigmatising cancer and improving culture more broadly doesn't get lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, it can be overwhelming in our roles sometimes, I have to say. And I think really just starting that conversation, whether it's a conversation with your leadership team, whether it's a conversation within your people team, I think that's the important step. And I think you'll find out very quickly that it's something that everyone will want to lean into. And I think also just making sure that it doesn't sit just with the HR team. It needs to sit everywhere else. And again, I think it's the type of movement and the area that you will see a lot of people lean into, and you will get that support from ground up and from the top. So I think just starting that conversation is a really good first step, and also just looking to see what you have got and what you can make of it.
Yeah, and to that point, surely there's not going to be anyone who pushes back against the idea of destigmatising cancer when that question is put to them. Or you would hope so anyway. You
would hope so. And I'm sure and I hope that would be the case. I think to your point, though, everyone has a lot on their plate, and sometimes they say, is this just another thing? I think it's a really important area. There are organisations like Cancer Council, Live with Cancer, and we're more than happy to share any information about working with cancer. It's a really good approach to how you can start and how you can just do those little steps along the way. And we've got some really good resources in Australia that can help you. Yeah. So you don't have to do it on your own. Yeah.
Pauly Grant, thank you so much for your time, and good on you for all the work that you're doing on this front with Publicis Groupe.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you to the listener for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, give us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, as it'll help other HR professionals discover and enjoy this show. We'll see you again next time.